What's up, everybody? I am Scott. This is the Stringjoy YouTube channel. You are you, I assume, and this is a baritone guitar, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So this is my first baritone guitar I've actually ever owned. I've had it for a few months now. It's a Supro. I believe it's a 27-inch scale, and it's a great player, honestly. It feels a lot just like a regular guitar. I was kind of bouncing between playing a 7-string guitar and playing a baritone and kind of seeing what could give me that low B while feeling the most natural. I tried this guy and just kind of fell in love. It really gives you, a much deeper range on the guitar, and kind of when I think about it, I'm not really playing up on the neck all that often, but I am playing down low very often, so this really expanded my tonal palette on the bottom end and really kind of started a little bit of a love affair with baritone guitars. Getting this out of the way from the get-go, my personal favorite baritone guitar string set is our 13.5 to 62 set. That's what I have on here right now. These came with probably the most popular baritone strings on the market. I won't say the brand, but they have the rainbow colored ball ends, and they were bad. I don't usually say that about all other manufacturer strings and stuff. They were all kind of fine, but the low B, which I think was maybe a 60 on that set, just didn't give me any presence. It was super flubby, sounded more like a bass string or like a really dead guitar string. I didn't like that at all, but this 62 in the bottom just kind of works just right for me. Gives me a tonal balance that I'm used to with a regular guitar, but here on a baritone. So baritone guitars first really started to show up in the 50s. You started seeing them kind of used more as a twangy instrument in some country early back in the day, but they've actually existed for a long time before that. Nobody knows exactly when baritone guitars came onto the market, but a lot of people kind of trace its origins back to the 17th century when you started to see instruments like the mandocello or other sort of hybrid instruments that took instruments that were already popular and expanded their range in terms of the notes they could do. And some people use those in order to play in ensembles with other similar instruments, or some people used them to fit in other environments. But basically you kind of saw this explosion where a lot of people were making different instruments and trying different things and figuring out what made the most sense, and that's when people think kind of the origins of the baritone guitar first really happened. That said, it was almost kind of forgotten or relegated to a little bit of a niche piece for a long time, until '56 when Dan Electra brought the baritone guitar onto the market, and that's when things really kind of got cooking. So what makes a baritone guitar a baritone? Well, obviously it's tuned a little bit differently. This guy is tuned to baritone standard, which is B, E, A, D, F sharp, B. Basically it'll play just like a normal guitar. It has the same sort of series of intervals as you're used to on a guitar, but tuned down from B to B. So if you're going to play anything normal that you're used to on E to E, it's just like capo the 5th fret, and that's a normal guitar. Everything that you have down below that is what makes a baritone unique. Now it does that in sort of two different ways. The first is that a baritone guitar has a little bit longer of a scale length. So most commonly you see baritone guitars come in between 27 and 30 inches in length. I would say 27 and 28 is kind of the most common that you see. Usually the 30 inches are more people adapting bass 6 type instruments into becoming baritone guitars. But because of that longer scale length, you're able to get a higher tension at a lower gauge of string, and that makes it a little bit easier to get down to B, E, A, D, F sharp, B without having things like inharmonicity cause issues or getting very flubby or losing your harmonics, all those things that happen when you try to take too short of a scale length and tune too low on it. Now, even though you have a longer scale length, that doesn't do the job on its own. You also need a little bit heavier of strings. Typically you see baritone strings come in between 12 gauge and 14 gauge. Obviously some people play a lot heavier than that, and some people use really light strings to get a ton of slinkiness. But basically a good way to think of it is a 12 on a baritone is roughly equivalent to about a 9 on a normal E to E electric guitar. 13s or 13.5s, like our balance set is, are more equivalent to 10s, and 14s are more equivalent to 11s. Basically, if you kind of chop the first string off of a regular standard set, so take the 11 out of an 11 to 50 and then add a low B, that's how you get a 14 to 64 baritone set. It's just kind of sliding everything down one. So what's a baritone guitar typically used for? Well, the big advantage of baritones is that they slot kind of right in between an electric guitar and a bass guitar. So you can use them in an ensemble with an electric and a bass to fill out a little bit of a different space than you usually see. Or you'll see a lot of folks kind of use them when they're more playing solo or playing in a three-piece in order to, kind of fill out a little bit more bass information. And you get some other people that just like to have that flexibility. They're often playing at the 5th fret or above in normal electric guitar land, but they have a little bit more information down at the bottom to be able to reach down to, much in the way that you would with a 5-string bass. What I really like about these instruments is that, a standard E bar chord's right up here at the 5th fret, so I can get down to a lower D really easy. or go below that. I could play an E flat, which is like, you know, a nightmare to do on a standard electric guitar. That's super easy on a baritone, so if you're playing more with horns, who are usually in B flat or E flat, that makes that a little bit easier. Really just gives you a lot more options to work with, you know, whether you want to be in the country land and just kind of hitting that really low kind of growly twang, or you want to play it like a standard guitar, just have a little bit more options there for you if you want to get a little bit lower. So when baritone guitars came around in the 50s, you really kind of started to see them in the work of Dwayne Eddy. He's in some ways kind of the godfather of modern baritone guitar, and it really came into prominence on his album, The Twang's the Thang, which is really fun to say. I kind of like saying that with the drawl. Yeah. You also started to see Brian Wilson use these, and of course Brian Wilson is the mastermind behind the Beach Boys, one of my favorite bands of all time. He was really a master at mixing different instruments to get a sound that's kind of the combination of the instrument. So this was a really great piece of his tonal palette, and even in their earlier work when it was kind of more simplistic surf rock, he really used that twang and that bottom end to kind of fill out chords and give you a really distinctive sound that a lot of people hadn't heard before. Now, I first really kind of discovered baritone guitar in older country music. You hear it in Walkin' After Midnight from Patsy Cline. They really started to use it for what they called the tic-tac sound. Sometimes people would use a baritone guitar or a bass six to kind of trace out the same lines that a bass guitar was using to kind of get that combination sound, much like I was talking about with Brian Wilson. But you really kind of saw it for those tic-tac walking bass lines on the bottom end that almost sound like they're a normal bass guitar, but they have a little bit more of a different tonality, and that came from baritone guitars. The final place that really kind of cemented the baritone guitar's role in history is spaghetti westerns. This is like the sound of those spaghetti westerns, like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Having those tic-tacky bass lines really kind of made that music have its signature vibe, and if you like that old music the way that I do, you know, a baritone guitar is essential in trying to recreate those kind of vibes. Now, for a modern guitarist like myself, or probably yourself if you're watching this video, it's kind of funny to think about baritone guitars having their origin in early country music and spaghetti westerns and surf rock and rockabilly, because what we really think of when we think about guitars tuned down to here is, of course, metal. Countless metal acts have used baritone guitars or guitars that are tuned to be more in the range of a baritone. Coheed and Cambria used a lot, Metallica, Cannibal Corpse, and on and on and on and on, off the top of my head. But what they really use the baritone guitar for is those deep, sludgy, thumpy bottom end riffs, which again to me is kind of funny knowing the origins of the instrument, that it took another 30, 40 years in the invention of metal to really kind of get the most out of this instrument or see where its most kind of logical modern usage would be. So this is just one man's opinion, but I love baritone guitars. I think that you would love them too. If you do have one, you probably already know what I mean. If you don't, and you've never played one, you just have to. I mean, it takes a second to get used to. Having that wider spacing between the frets is kind of a new thing for a regular electric player. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's less than you would expect. And I think one of my favorite things about baritone guitars are that, you know, cowboy chords are just really logical riffs that feel a little bit cliche on a normal guitar. On a baritone guitar, they just sound so wide open. It sounds like something totally new and really full and powerful. And to me, just kind of having another instrument in my arsenal that I can pull out that's going to give me a different sound that I'm used to and kind of change where I'm falling into ruts on the fretboard is a super, super powerful thing. Now, if you do get a baritone guitar, or if you have one right now, I can't express enough. I mean, I know I'm biased, but still, the right strings for baritone are super, super important. They're important for all guitars, but when you get down this low, a lot of the major manufacturers' sets that end on like a 56 or something, they just don't really do it. It doesn't really give you that full, powerful, balanced bottom end. So I really recommend checking out a balanced baritone set. We have a 12, a 13.5, and a 14. Again, my favorite is the 13.5 set. It's basically a baritone version of our balanced lights that are so popular for electric guitar. It does all those things as their balanced lights, but in a baritone tonal range. Keeps everything really balanced. You have some nice percussive tightness on the bottom end and still a lot of flexibility on the top end. Or if you're tuning down to A, I really recommend our 14 set. That seems to work really well for me there. But I'm mostly a B to B guy, 13.5, and it works great for me.